Hello. Wow, that's loud. How's everybody? Welcome. My name is Chris Nims. I am thrilled to be here on behalf of Captial One to talk a little bit about our story and our journey. I am the SVP of Cloud and Productivity Engineering at Captial One. And I lead an organization that's really ultimately about enablement, right? How we drive productivity for our engineers. And I've been here for about a year and a half. My background is primarily in cybersecurity, and I came to Captial One a number of reasons. One of the most significant of which was I found a lot of technology leaders, a lot of business leaders in general, who are like-minded, seeing the value of enabling employees with the power of software, enabling them to do the right thing, and as we talk about it internally, making it easy to do the right thing, right? The right thing is the easy way is the secure way, as we talk about it, right? We want the right thing to be the path of least resistance. So before we dig in too much, I want to take a moment to introduce the other leaders who are here with me from Captial One. Melanie Frank is a leader in our cyber architecture and engineering organization. And Meyer leads cloud and connectivity. And they are both fantastic engineering leaders from which I learn every single day. So obviously there's a huge team behind us and all the work that we're doing every day. Thrilled that we're able to be here in the midst of the pandemic, and wish that we had more folks with us. So to help set some context, let me introduce Captial One just briefly, talk a bit about our journey, our environments in AWS, specifically to help ground the conversation. Hopefully many of you are already familiar with some of our products. We are a 25-year-old company that's still founder-led, which is a really fantastic advantage for us. The nation's largest direct bank, large credit card issuer. I'm sure many of you have seen advertisements. What's in your wallet? Anybody? More than 70 million customer accounts and around 50,000 associates in a Fortune 100 company. From the founding of the company, we have been data-driven and analytical with a huge focus, unsurprisingly, on risk management, as that's really our business. So that deep analytical muscle and our comprehensive focus on risk management is what underlies not only our products, right, how we can offer such competitive financial products, but also our culture. And that's what led us to believe technology is something that we saw, right, software and ultimately the cloud, as incredibly transformative forces that were going to shape the world around us. And we believe that far from being a risk, right, something to be afraid of, something to run away from, we saw the cloud as something that would be an incredible unlock for our ability to deliver more innovation and market-leading products for our customers. So we declared early on that the bank of the future was going to be driven by software and, of course, ultimately the cloud. So we knew that there was going to be a really comprehensive transformation that would take place. That transformation started roughly 8 years ago. Talent, as we are seeing now, is always the most important. And we had incredible talent across the business at the time. But we knew that we really needed to continue to invest and build technology talent as we brought software development in-house and hired thousands of engineers. Right? We weren't just executing on transformation, but we were really defining what this all would look like for us as a company. So clearly, we knew it was about technology infrastructure, leapfrogging a lot of what exists in financial services today, which is largely legacy third-party systems. And ultimately, we would be really rethinking the way that we work. So in that period, the last several years, we're completely agile now. We're cloud native, building applications, using native services. We've got an open source foundation, right? That really helps us benefit from the world's innovation. We use modern architectural standards, microservices, APIs, DevOps, part of the culture. We take a human-centered design approach to how we build our applications, both those for our consumers as well as those that are internal. And we're built for a world of AI and machine learning. So let's talk a little bit about what our environment looks like on AWS. We have thousands of accounts. We believe in segmentation, and we organize our workloads accordingly. We obviously run quite a bit of compute. As I mentioned, we have tens of millions of customers. We are one of the largest consumers of AWS alongside other great companies like Netflix. We have about 2,000 applications running in the cloud, the vast majority of which we built in-house. We have more than 85,000 server instances. We have hundreds of petabytes of data in our transactional data stores. So of course, being primarily a data-driven and analytical company, we store a large amount of data. And we leverage a whole range of AWS services to be able to do that. We also leverage services that are much higher in the stack. We really see the cloud fundamentally as a way for us to offload management of infrastructure. Engineers, software developers are honestly one of the most critical resources that we have, and we want our engineers spending their capacity on really, really important business problems, not rote tasks, right? Not rebuilding servers, patching, right? Computer scientists got a computer science degree because they like solving really hard computer science problems. They don't necessarily get super excited about the menial stuff. So as we look at, by the way, just a quick side note, we do leverage other cloud technology, but I'm specifically referring to SaaS-like products. So think Google Workspaces, for example, as our collaboration platform. But for our applications, which is the majority of our focus, we're a very strong partner with AWS, and we believe in their ability to stay innovative and to deliver strong operational performance. So over this time, migrating everything to AWS. We are all in AWS now, by the way, at the early part of this transformation. In 2015, we declared that we were going to be completely out of data centers by 2020. In September of 2020, we pulled the plug on the last data center. So we've made this transition. So now that we're supporting millions of customers in the cloud, what have we learned? Technology, infrastructure matters, but often it's not the most important thing. Like any technology, how you use it, how you enable it, and how you enable your teams to work with it is really important. We're hearing a lot about AWS infrastructure this week from AWS as well as other customers. And we certainly have teams that spend a lot of our time on that infrastructure, like many of you do, but big focus on building tooling that helps us manage that infrastructure, stitch things together. So, for us at our scale, the incredible services, the native services and moving up the stack, those services we get from AWS are just baseline for how we operate in the cloud. It's table stakes. Being successful in the cloud is about our practices, but it's also significantly about our culture. We put a lot of energy, particularly into a few specific areas that we're going to talk about today. Our architecture practices, our focus on resilience, how we choose to expose the innovation from AWS to our teams. Across all of that, what we want to talk a little bit about today is that impact, share some of our successes, and we're going to focus a lot on things like education of our teams, building an engineering culture that is geared toward taking advantage of the cloud. So I'm going to turn it over to Will, who's going to talk to you a bit about that first point and some of our practices in the cloud.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. My name is Will. So I lead an organization called Cloud Engineering and Networking. We've changed the name a few times, but that's the gist. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the practices that we use to make ourselves successful on the cloud. Right? Chris talked about this transformation journey that we've been on, and we often say, well, we did all that work, and now we're here. What happens? But thanks for having us. I think being at reInvent is amazing. It's great to hear so much from AWS about all the things that they're doing, all the great stuff that's coming. But I also really just love hearing from other customers, comparing notes. So thanks, everybody that's been kind of sharing your journey in sessions in the hallway. Thanks for showing up virtually and in the real world to hear a little bit about ours. We love what we do on the cloud, and we are super happy to talk about it. So let's see, in my organization, we really look after what I'll call the core primitives of the cloud, right? So our organizations, our accounts, our VPCs, our capacity, our spend. We spend a lot of time on security and compliance, for sure. But I think our mission really is more to help Capital One be successful on the cloud. And there's a lot to that. I want to talk about just a couple of the practices that we have found helpful in doing that. And I'll say that for us, and I hope you get a sense of this from Chris, our practices and kind of how we work are really just informed by the scale that we're operating at. So we're running a complete financial services institution on the public cloud. And it's fun to compare notes with other big customers because, look, it has never been easier to get started on the cloud, but running there at massive scale is still non-trivial. We're dealing with, I think, all of the technical issues that you would expect that come with scale, millions of customers, transaction loads, et cetera. But more than that, we're constantly working against the complexity that kind of creeps in as you move forward, as you move to the cloud, as you expand, creeps into your architecture, creeps into your infrastructure, creeps into your way of working. And it's that complexity really that is the sort of root cause of all the other problems, right? It's how you create risk, it's how you create outages, it's how you slow your teams down. So we're very focused on removing, eliminating, preventing complexity sort of in our environment. And I would say, AWS in particular, the cloud in general, have just been huge accelerators for us as a business. But the cloud's not magic, and we have had to build and learn a whole bunch along the way. So when you look at kind of a snapshot, how do we work, end of 2021, what are some of our practices? Some of it is informed by, pretty comprehensive long-term plan, transformation program, all of that. And some of it is just being responsive to what works, what doesn't work, and learning along the way. And I think, doing that is just part of being agile in a space that we all get to work where the technology is changing so quickly. It's also just good engineering. So let's talk about a couple of things that we spend a fair bit of time working on and thinking about. So in our architecture, how do we really embrace the fact that the cloud isn't just a data center in the sky? How do we help ourselves build and think in cloud-native ways? But as we do that, still create some amount of consistency across a huge environment. How do we stay resilient? Sometimes we talk about the cloud as if it's just perfectly resilient by design, and it's a little more complicated than that. AWS services do fail. Our own services fail. We spend a lot of time on that. We all care about costs, right? We care about how much money we spend on the cloud, but spending money on the cloud isn't necessarily a problem. It's wasting money on the cloud that's the problem. So how do we help our teams tell the difference and kind of make that a habit? And then even seemingly simple questions like, hey, which cloud services should we use, become pretty complicated at scale, right? We want to really expose all of this great stuff we're hearing about this week to our engineering teams and take full advantage of it. That's why we moved to the cloud in the first place. But we need to do that in a way that keeps us safe and sane as we go forward. And I think all those things are pretty applicable to all of us, whether you're part of a really large organization like ours, you're part of a much smaller one. Maybe you're starting a cloud journey, maybe you finished a cloud journey, maybe you were born on the cloud and it's all you've ever known. But I think these are the kinds of challenges that separate just being on the cloud from really thriving on the cloud. And so again, to Chris's point, I think we think it's very much not just about infrastructure, it's practices, it's culture that really help make that difference. So let me talk a little bit about architecture first. We have found it helpful to kind of rally around these two calls to action, standardize and automate. And I think especially for the engineers in the room, right, standardize can sound a little bit like a limitation. Hey, automate sounds nice, but maybe a little bit obvious. But we have found this a really powerful rally. To Chris's point, we want to see our teams getting deep with their customers, innovating on the problems our customers have, moving quickly. We know that it is really easy to just rebuild things, to sort of suffer through working with technology that isn't fully integrated into the tooling and all of the layers of infrastructure that we have around us. So we really try to focus on standardization as a way to remove too many choices for some of those very, very basic capabilities. And so we have made a concerted effort to standardize, right? And we have standardized on shared enterprise platforms for a whole bunch of use cases. A really simple example would be like code to customer deployment pipeline. We've standardized on fewer and fewer programming languages, fewer and fewer OS distributions. We're big believers in serverless, and so we're doing work now to standardize on the use of functions and Lambda, and not just containers, but also managed container environments. So we put a lot of energy into reducing what we call arbitrary uniqueness in the environment. And it's not been easy. You can imagine some of the debates that we have about what those standards should be. It also requires that these shared solutions that we provide or recommend, if they're Amazon solutions, they just need to be awesome, right? There's an incredibly high bar for how well those things work, how the quality level that we have to live up to. So it's not easy, but we think that that rally is really important. It also, by the way, makes it much easier for engineers to move around the organization. That's something we do a lot at Captial One. It's a nice feature of the culture. If we are all leveraging shared AWS learning and standard enterprise solutions for lots of basic use cases, mobility becomes much easier. And then on automation, I think a little more obvious, but certainly we've spent a lot of time on automating things that might otherwise be manual. So provisioning new environments for developers, for development teams, that's an example. But mostly we're focused on automation of the infrastructure itself and to kind of continue the sort of core value prop of the cloud, right? It's about reducing undifferentiated heavy lifting and having the infrastructure really manage itself. So huge focus for us. So the practice of architecture, which we'll talk a little bit about, is really just kind of how we put that stuff into action from a process, people, tools perspective. So we work really hard to combat kind of the classic anti-patterns with architecture, right? The ivory towers and the diagrams and the documents that nobody reads. We really approach architecture as a practice that spans the entire organization, that includes the teams, that's integrated into our way of working. It is centralized to an extent because we do need to set standards, we need to offer guidance, especially given the standardization and automation strategy we just talked about. But it's also federated, right? And it really includes the teams that are building solutions on the ground. And we're constantly striving for this balance of local decision-making, local autonomy, local speed, while also not sacrificing some amount of enterprise consistency. We really, you need both. We think one without the other doesn't work. So, a couple of points on sort of the process of how this works. We do designate, architects for all of our applications. We've got thousands of applications. That clarity is really important. But that architect role is often just played by an engineer in the team. We have a bunch of amazing distinguished engineers at the company. They often will play those roles. It's a great way to make an impact. We will be pretty structured in the way that we document target states for a bunch of different domains across the organization. We pay real explicit attention to, is a given application an area of investment or an area of decommission? We track that explicitly. We use working groups and RFCs a lot, right? So it's very common for us to pull together a group of folks from across the organization, get as much different sort of skill mix as we can, attack a hard problem, work through it, make a proposal, share that, socialize that, get feedback, and then we'll codify that. And we're pretty structured about how we codify that. It could be in the form of a standard or a policy. It could also be in something we call the capabilities catalog, where we're really tracking, I think a couple of hundred at this point, solutions to kind of shared problems. And we're very explicit about, this is a required, preferred, available solution to, some given problem space. So that's sort of a key part of how that works. And by the way, some of these discussions are the most fun meetings that you get to be in, just having these debates about what these answers should be. It all comes together then, all these artifacts that we've talked about, in something we call BRLR, or build readiness, launch readiness. And it is a little bit what it sounds like, right? It's kind of a gate, pre-build, pre-deploy. But we really approach it as more of a bi-directional sort of effort. So on the one hand, yes, we're trying to check in with teams, make sure that what we're building is following our best practices and doing what we want it to be doing. But at the same time, we're really using that as an opportunity to check in on those best practices, check in on that target state, and ask ourselves, like, are these still valid? Is this still the right target state? And so that bidirectionality is really important, again, to get this mix of sort of autonomy and speed at the local level while also preserving that long-term consistency. From a tools perspective, we've got a bunch of tools and templates and stuff that support this. We have an architecture portal. You can look up any of these capabilities I talked about. We make standards, very visible and usable. And you can even see for a given application, how does it stack up against sort of our best practices? Does it publish a real-time data feed that it's appropriately registering? Is it a microservice? So we really leverage the tools to make this transparent, right, and get the organization kind of involved. I'll give just a quick example of this in action. I love using relational databases as an example because sometimes we think these things are only about the most new conceptual technology, but it applies just very practical challenges that we're facing. So in the organization, we had a lot of relational databases around. We weren't really being super clear about what we thought good looked like. And aside from just being a little bit too diverse, it created a problem from a resiliency perspective. We weren't as resilient to regional failure as we wanted to be. And I'll talk about that more in a second. We care a lot about resistance to regional failure. And so kind of as I talked about, pulled a group together led by one of our senior distinguished engineers, worked through kind of the whole decision tree of what to use when from a data storage perspective. And some of the serverless data storage is here and sort of other parts of this picture as well. But for the relational database piece, really landed on the use of Aurora Global DB. The diagram says RDS, but mostly we're talking about Aurora. And we migrated one of our large platforms, the virtual card number system, supports our virtual card numbers, migrated over and saw what you would expect, much better storage tier scaling, but also application layer performance improvement as well. So it was a really good story. And then because we know that, look, just producing a diagram or a document that says use this isn't enough, we're working to integrate that into the tooling. I talked about the automated deployment shared system, and the more that we can integrate that, so look, if you want to just stand up a relational database that is AZ and regionally resilient, it's trivially easy to do that. So the standardization and automation point kind of comes into play with how we realize these guidelines. And we try to do that as much as we can, right? It's much better to do this in code than in some kind of an architecture meeting. We'll talk a little bit more about resilience or resiliency, whichever you prefer. I mentioned regional resiliency. So, we know some of being resilient is just about the design of our systems. And so we spend a lot of time on decoupling. We spend a lot of time with Amazon on predictive scaling and auto scaling. We've really pushed hard on those capabilities over the years. But, I think we also spend a whole bunch of time on our process around resiliency. And we do that for a couple of reasons. Look, we're an engineering team. We don't like it when our services go down. But really, if you think about a financial services offering, being resilient is just part of the core value prop of the product, right? If it's not resilient, if you can't trust it, if you can't pay for things, if your money's not safe, it's not viable. So it is a fundamental part of kind of how we approach our product feature set. We spend a lot of time on resiliency. We have regulators that we work with as well, and they certainly care a whole bunch about us being resilient too. And again, we really work hard to kind of make it a core strength, not just something that we do. And we've made pretty significant improvement over the years. This is kind of a long-term trajectory. We've taken the number of customer impacting incidents that we have down by about a factor of 3 over the last couple of years as we've moved to the cloud. We have taken our time to recover from those incidents. We've improved it about 15x, which is pretty significant. We spend a lot of energy learning every single thing we can from every one of those failures. You all probably do postmortems as well. We are very focused on them being blameless, and we're especially focused on the action items that come out of our incident reviews and really following up on those. Right? It's pretty easy to kind of show up in a Monday morning quarterback situation, lay out all the things that should have been different, and all the changes you want to make. It is much harder to actually keep track of all of those changes and really execute and deliver on those changes. Sometimes it takes a really significant amount of time. So we are very focused on that. We also, though, I think, appreciate that no matter how much work we do on these systems, something's probably going to go wrong. And so we really try to practice for that, and we try to rehearse for that. And we do that as a way to, yes, certainly respond better when things do fail, but also really to identify the failure modes before they occur. So we do tabletop exercises, we do game day simulations where in production or in a tabletop context, we'll create a failure, we'll run through all of our playbooks, we will test our operational and technical response, but we're also really testing our kind of decision-making response, right? We don't want to be, for example, in the middle of an incident trying to figure out what is the customer impact threshold before we would turn off a feature, for example. So we really work hard to include all of those kinds of decision trees in our planning exercise, including who makes those decisions, right? We don't want to be on incident calls trying to figure out, like, how should we handle this, right? So we really try to predictively lay that stuff out. We also take the rehearsal and the practice to a little bit of an extreme. At Captial One, we do something called a technical recovery exercise where we actually will evacuate an entire region, so say East 1, and we'll prove to ourselves that we can still service our customers, we can still run our entire business with that region being completely unavailable. We do that quarterly. A couple of times a year, we actually will break the network connectivity as well. So when we say that we can prove that we can run without that region, like there's really no faking it. There's no connectivity at all. And we actually do a no-notice version of that too, where engineers won't know within a specific time window like when that's going to happen. You get paged in. It's just like a production issue. And I think you can imagine probably that's super painful at first, and it's tough when you start. But it has been incredibly helpful for us. It creates the right incentives, right? If this isn't automated, if your system's not active, if it's not failing over automatically, it is really just incredibly painful. So it creates the right incentives for us to build resilient systems by design. And look, we're still working on it. We're still improving, but it really is a core focus for us. And we think that practicing for failure, rehearsing for failure is one of our key recipes for success on the cloud. We think it should be for yours as well. Sorry, I don't know where the receiver is for this. There we go. OK, let's talk about a little bit about governance. I'll kind of close on governance. So, I don't love the term cloud governance for a couple reasons. One is it just gets overloaded a lot. Usually we're talking about security, compliance, cost, operations, service approval. But really, I think most of the time when people hear governance, they think about the things that you can't do, right? That's kind of what first comes to mind. And you need, robust controls and guardrails and protections for sure, but that's not really the outcome, right? The outcome is we want our teams to be able to move quickly, embrace the cloud, innovate for their customers, and do it safely and cost-effectively and in a way that's in line with our broader cloud and architecture strategy. But we don't want them to have to think about that all the time. And so, and Chris mentioned this a little bit, we really focus on the enablement role sort of governance and try to make the easy thing also the right thing. And we think when done well, governance can actually make you faster. So that is the bar we set for ourselves. I'll say it is easier said than done. A little bit of a work in progress, but it's incredibly important to us as a principle that that's how we approach it. And practically speaking, sometimes we do need to stand in the way of incredible innovations coming from AWS and our teams. We run every new AWS service through, at this point, what is a quite comprehensive analysis. We're looking for risk, security implications for sure. We're also looking for consistency with our architectural direction. I talked a little bit about some of the shared enterprise platforms. So we really will spend time kind of interrogating these services. And for all the things we allow our teams to use, there are plenty that we don't. It's an allow list, not a deny list. That's important. And why is that? Well, often it comes down to flexibility, right? The services that AWS is launching are often incredibly flexible. That's great for a whole bunch of use cases. Sometimes if your goal is to make it impossible to really do something silly, we need to lock things down a little bit. And I think you've seen AWS and other cloud providers over the years really improving on the basics. I think EC2, S3 services that have been around are mature at this point. And we have less challenges there. It's much more as you get up the top of the stack, and with kind of newer things. We've harped on VPC endpoints for years and years, for example. So it's improving. I would say though, our goal really is not to hide services from our engineering teams. That's the whole reason we moved to the cloud, is because we want to take advantage of this stuff. So we work really hard to try to enable native building blocks rather than abstract them. I think anyone that's tried to run some kind of a large abstraction layer on top of the cloud, you realize how challenging it is to keep up with the pace of change underneath you and the demand above you. So we work much harder to enable the native services and allow more and more of our organization to contribute to doing that than just trying to hide everything. That's kind of a core premise. We also think a bunch about how do we handle risks in the environment. We scan the environments constantly, production, development, everything. But finding a problem in the environment, isn't great. Obviously, from a risk perspective, that's not, you don't want to find a problem after it's happened. But from more of a cost perspective, it is incredibly painful to fix something, in production or in a development environment. If you're an engineering team and you're getting, dinged with alerts, or somebody like me shows up and says, hey, we need to remediate something, it is just incredibly high cost for the team to have to deal with that. And so we're much more focused on everything we can do to prevent the problem rather than just detect it and then ask someone to fix it or shut something off. It goes back a little bit to what I was talking about, the strategy with kind of shared tooling, shared central enterprise platforms. The more that we are using those, the more that we can build controls into the environment, the more that we can make it transparent, the more we can make the easy thing the right thing. Same goes for service adoption, right? The more we can make a smart decision about what we adopt and when, the less likely we're going to have to clean up something later, even if it's just like a weird architecture decision, not actually a security risk. So lots of focus there. And I'll say lastly, we also spend a lot of time producing metrics, data, transparency, visibility for teams kind of on their posture. We want them to really understand where they are. We're taking the same approach with cloud costs. We want to give teams a clear sense of not just how much they're spending, but where is there an opportunity to save? How difficult might it be to take advantage of that opportunity? You need the ROI, as well, and really expose that to teams. So a lot of energy in just transparently arming teams with the data that they need to make smart decisions, in their day-to-day way of working and kind of in their dev process. So, I think all that stuff is helpful too for leaders who need to make prioritization decisions and kind of understand where to invest. But it's also just really useful for engineers, right, who want to do the right thing and are passionate about the quality of their solutions, and you just need to arm them with, good data, good information. So we very much take that approach. I will close on the governance point and just say that, the challenge I kind of talk about of, balancing access to innovation, access to the cloud, leverage every amazing thing that's been announced this week, and also keeping the environment, safe and sane, is an incredibly, I'll say, invigorating challenge. But it's a fun space to be in, cloud enablement, not just cloud governance. And then I'll close on practices sort of generally and just say, again, for Captial One, it's about standardization and automation. It's about practicing for failure as a way to prevent it. And it's about approaching everything you do with really an enablement focus versus a control focus. And that's kind of how we approach things. And then, back to the point Chris was making before, the practices and kind of how you work, we think are a key part of the recipe. So is your work on culture, and it's often the most interesting and challenging. So I want to turn it to Melanie, and she'll chat a little bit about that. Thanks, y'all. Welcome, Melanie.
All right, thanks, Will. Okay, so my name's Melanie, as Will said. And if governance is the dirty word, then culture is the fluffy word. But I'm excited to talk to you about culture today because it can be one of the hardest things and yet one of the most important things that you do. Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I will tell you that a bad culture will eat your technology and your innovation for lunch. It doesn't just happen. You don't just inherit a new culture by arriving in the cloud. It's not an outcome. It's a part of the transformation. And the cultural transformation can be just as important, if not more important, than the transformation of the technology itself. As I think about our cloud transformation, I think about an instance of cultural transformation in my own family, and the culture that in our house emanates from the kitchen. And it started with a very small tech transformation with the gift of our first Alexa. And what that changed in our kitchen was now constant music, kids laughing at jokes and fart noises, and a much easier to keep up to date shopping list. That then drove another tech transformation with automated switches and plugs. Because who has time to go turn on a light? And this is never more evident than at scale, also known as Christmas time. No longer do I run around the house and plug in the tree and plug in the lights and plug in the mini trees and the snowmen and then run around every night unplugging everything. I can stand in my kitchen and declare, Alexa, throw up Christmas. And all the lights come on, and she starts playing holiday music. And that is the actual name of our routine. My husband thought it was funny because our house does look like Christmas threw up all over it right now. So behold the dance between technology and culture, and arrive at the day where I'm standing in my kitchen with dirty hands, looking at a recipe, and I say, Alexa, set the oven to 350 degrees. And nothing happens. It would be very easy for her, except for the fact that I do not have a smart stove, probably yet. The tech changed the culture changed the technology, and so on, and so on. So why is this important? We've alluded to it, both Chris and Will. The cultural change unlocks the next phase of our tech transformation. It moved us from being just in the cloud to being able to fully leverage the power of the cloud. As you arrive in AWS, you will start to realize the benefits of cost and speed of innovation. But you will not fully realize it unless your culture transforms and your people transform with it. That starts with understanding your current culture, what it is, why it is what it is. Do you have a well-instantiated culture that has been ingrained over decades? Are you new, and is your culture still forming? I think as technologists and technology leaders, how much time we love to spend designing and architecting solutions, debating what the right approach or architecture might be. When was the last time you spent that much time and were that intentional designing your culture? And yet, in probably every interview we've all sat in, you get the question, what's your culture like? From talent that you are trying to attract to your team. Culture attracts talent, talent drives innovation, innovation attracts more talent. So how do you do this? We'll talk about three things that were a key part for us. They're somewhat intertwined, and they feed off of each other. And I'll start with mindset. The most obvious shift in mindset is not building for a data center any longer. It's super different to build natively in the cloud. So no more data center if you were ever in one. If you weren't, congratulations, it's fantastic. This means cloud native versus lift and shift. We can take shortcuts to arrive in the cloud. You can lift and shift your applications and run them in the cloud. There's lots of ways to do that. Will you fully benefit from the power of the cloud? Absolutely not. Not until you modernize and use the cloud native services. Not until you start to shift from these heavyweight monolithic applications to the microservices that we all know are better, but very different to build and run. Security, we know, is very different. And talent, as we think about moving and shifting the skills and the talent that we attract to the team, it actually means having talent that's willing to throw away something that they built 6 months ago because there is a better solution, and knows that they can continuously refactor without fear based on automation that they drove that Will talked about. Upskilling the teams, hiring at scale for those who know how to build with cloud-native tools, and or upskilling the talent that you have. This means hiring people that not necessarily know how to do what you need them to do, but they're excited about learning how and continuously learning. As we all know, the pace of technology innovation changes, and now we've got all sorts of more new things to learn after this week that based on what was announced. In 2017, one of the things that we did, which is a part of our continuous investment in the skilling of our teams, we started something called Tech College. It's an innovative learning hub. It is driven content-wise by our engineers. We have 13 different disciplines: software engineering, mobile, AI, data, of course, cloud computing. You get the idea. This is how you keep a large talent pool at the leading edge of technology. And lastly, we focused all along the way on delivering wins for the sake of our engineers and our business to help build the energy that sucks people in. You see the wins, you want to get there too, and to create the fortitude that you need to both get to the cloud and then stay there and stay on top of it. So I want to tell you a success story from one of our teams and get a little specific with it and talk about a team that I led when I was in the card line of business, which was responsible for our decisioning technology. As you can imagine and guess and probably list yourself, we make a load of decisions from a technology standpoint every day and every minute. It might be a decision when you apply for a credit card on whether or not you're approved or declined, or if you are approved, what your credit limit or initial credit limit might be. It might be at the swipe of the card as to whether that transaction is approved or declined. When you make a payment, how to treat that. Multiple layers of fraud decisions that happen. All of these decisions within microseconds. And as we think about the example of a credit limit, that is something that gets reevaluated multiple times through the life of an account. As we arrived in AWS with the full power of cloud computing behind us, our ability to make these changes shifts significantly. This involved shifting mindset in the teams from using synchronous API calls to a real-time event-based architecture. That seems so obvious, but is very, very different. For engineers, it meant bounded context around each component, loosely coupled, independently available, and highly scalable services with flexible interface specifications, all based on cloud-native services. As the technology teams unleashed the power of technology, the business could then begin to dream of capabilities and experiences that weren't possible or feasible before. I think about our business partners and the promises that we make to them as a technology organization. Well, if we can just modernize this technology, you'll be able to go faster. And they never seem to actually fully benefit from those things. And so this trust, how does this trust build over time? And really for us, it was, oh, this does work. Like, I can stop asking you how to get from here to there on the horse and buggy. There's a much better, faster, more modern technology way. And now that I know that a car exists or a jet plane exists, well, now we could do this instead. It was, for us, about moving those credit line decisions and all of those decisions to decisions that are made in the moment, accurately and predictably every time. And ultimately, moving from those batch experiences that you expect of banks to real-time intelligent solutions that you can come to expect from Captial One. So I'm going to hand it back to Chris to wrap up for us. And thank you guys for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate it. So let me just summarize, if I may. In order to transform and take full advantage of the cloud, you need to be willing to take steps that are initially really disruptive. You've got to find the balance between centralization and federation of things like architecture practices. You have to plan to fail. It can take a lot of time and energy investment to practice failure. Doing so, though, allows you to learn hard lessons, allows you to improve, and over time, this becomes easier. In the early stages of cloud governance, you're going to feel like you're trying to swim upstream against the current. But you're going to learn opportunities, you're going to make trade-offs, but it's critical that you make the effort that makes governance enable innovation. Your people are so important, and you must invest in them in many, many ways. Your people have to buy into your strategy. So set a clear vision and how you're going to achieve it. Make it feel real to your teams at every level. Enable your organization with the tools to be successful. Training, industry connections, right? Empowerment at all levels. And importantly, identify key milestones along the way and celebrate success. And encourage your teams to be super proud of engineering excellence. And then embrace the fact that you're never done. Using the power of AWS, you're sharing the burden of infrastructure management, which gives you the capacity to continue to mature your practices. You heard a lot about culture. Trying to do a big bang culture change, you're going to have varied success. But if you iterate in manageable amounts, that's how you're going to lead to sustainable growth. So build these things into the DNA of your organization so that you are always staying in line with the next wave of innovation. I hope you enjoyed this presentation as much as we enjoyed sharing our journey with you. We're going to stick around afterwards to chat a little bit if folks have questions. Thank you very much.